Locating Atlantis in Time and Space, an historian's take. Have you ever wondered why the stories about Atlantis are still popular and being reproduced in popular culture such as TV series and movies today? Also, here on YouTube, countless videos on the subjects has been made. Atlantis and relating issues are being discussed on popular channels such as Jimmy Boise, Bright Insight, and theories of lost ancient civilizations have been popularized and brought to the masses by the world's largest podcast host, Joe Rogan, in his interviews with Graham, Hancock, and Randall Carlson. Hello, my name is Tor Vestby, and this is my channel, Informator. In this video, I am dealing with the lost precursor civilization hypothesis. Prior to the earliest known civilization, there existed even older civilizations with a high level of technology. Today I'm going to be talking mainly about Atlantis. To understand this problem, we need to start with the story of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis is first found in the Greek philosophers Plato's work Timaeus and Critias in an allegory about the hubris of men. In the story, Atlantis is described as a great continent in the Atlantic Oceans beyond the Pillars of Hercules or the Strait of Gibraltar. With an island consisting of concentric rings of moats and land dug out by Poseidon himself, on which the Atlanteans build their capital city. In the story, the Atlanteans are conquering the entire known world, the area surrounding the Mediterranean oceans, from west to east, until they are met by fierce resistance by a league of allies led by Athens. Athens prevails and liberates the lands previously occupied by the Atlanteans. Afterwards, Atlantis is struck by violent earthquakes and floods, and the island sinks into the ocean. Most scholars believe that the story about Atlantis, which is found in the writings of Plato, is not meant as real history, but rather an allegory to prove a point Plato is trying to make about the hubris of men, which are the Atlanteans, and the decline of Athens. One central piece of information that gives this away is that the civilization of Atlantis is pitched in a bitter conflict with Athens. While the dating of the destruction of Atlantis is given 9,000 years before Solon, long before there ever was a city in Attica that resembles anything as described as Athens in the story. Nevertheless, the story about Atlantis rings true and are taken seriously by scholars still today, and suggestions for locations keep coming up. It seems to never stop capturing the imaginations of new generations. Perhaps that's because the story is true on some level. The classical interpretation of Atlantis as a lost, advanced, ancient civilization sunken into the seabed in the Atlantic Oceans are most certainly not factual, but the story may have other elements that may originate in historical reality. For example, many scholars point to the island of Santorini in the Aegean Ocean as the most likely candidate as the origin of the story of Atlantis, due to several similarities. It is ring-shaped, and the civilization that were living there were destroyed by volcanic eruptions in 1600 BCE. Before the eruption, that scholars believed may have been the cause of the decline of the Minoan civilization, the island ring shape were even more pronounced. At Thera, the archaeological site of the Bronze Age culture that existed on the island of Santorini before the eruption, excavations have produced a fresco of a city located on an island surrounded by water, resembling the descriptions from Plato's story. The obvious issue with the misdating might be explained as a translation error, as the story about Atlantis originated from Egypt, and Plato's sources might have been off by a decimal place. Do the math, and the new date is 1500 BCE. That is a lot closer to the actual date of the eruption that devastated the island around 1600 BCE. It also brings it into the era of Athens, which by then was populated by the people of the Mycenaean culture. This leads many scholars to conclude that Santorini or ancient Thera is the most likely location for the origin of the myth of Atlantis. However, people keep looking for Atlantis in new places, as the stories about Atlantis in Plato's Timaeus and Critias are quite rich in details. You can cherry-pick them to fit your favorite location alternative. An example of this is Jimmy Boise videos, where he places Atlantis in the middle of the Saharan desert at a Rikat structure in Mauritania. I don't really want to hate on Jimmy, because I enjoy his videos and find many of them thought-provoking. The following comments relates to his series on YouTube about Atlantis. The problem with Jimmy's videos is that they suffer from logical fallacies, such as jumping to conclusions, confirmation bias, and omission of facts that contradicts your preferred narrative, also called cherry-picking. One example is the omission of the need for the city of Athens to be contemporary with Atlantis, when there is no archaeological evidence for the existence of a city at Athens going back to 9600 BCE. Another omission is the total absence of any archaeological evidence at the Rikat structure. For these reasons, although compelling, his videos and the arguments he presents in them are unscientific. As an historian in academia, you are required to follow certain rules and guidelines to produce new historical science of any academic value. In investigating and writing about Atlantis, you would first need to read all the relevant historical and archaeological articles on the matter. Then you will need to consult experts on Plato, as he is the sole source of information on the subjects. This, however, takes a lot of time and effort, and therefore, not many people are able or willing to do so. When faced with new information from sources that are not peer-reviewed, such as the video from the webpage visiting Atlantis.com that Jimmy is referencing, you need to consider the evidence presented very carefully. You need to play the devil's advocate, poking and prying at the arguments and evidence presented to try to find weaknesses. This is normally a job for experienced archaeologists and historians, and are done both before and after publication of new articles in scientific literature. This process, however, are seen by Jimmy Boise and other alternative thinkers, or pseudo-archaeologists, as others would call them, as a kind of conspiracy to keep the truth from the public. The peer review process is seen as gatekeeping, aiming to keep out alternative theories and explanations. My experience from academic research is that this is not the case. There is sometimes a tendency of paradigm bias within certain fields of study. Paradigm bias means that established scientists that have made their careers on certain perspective or narrative might be overly skeptical when presented with new information that in a major way contradicts their own narratives and explanations. Most scientists, however, are open-minded and inquisitive and would love to be proven wrong if that opens new fields of research that are able to produce new knowledge. The point is this: the only way you can arrive at the Rikat structure as the most likely location of the capital city of Atlantis is by jumping to conclusions after seeing the concentric circles of the structures, and through confirmation bias disregarding all other, in my opinion, more plausible locations, such as ancient Thera at modern-day Santorini. By cherry-picking, you can make a compelling argument by omitting all the evidence that contradicts your theory. Amongst them would be the need for Athens to be contemporary with Atlantis, the lack of archaeological evidence at the recart structure, the improbable locations for flooding, and that the elevation is too high even considering land rise. In his third video on Atlantis, Jimmy presents a map by Herodotus. He is considered the first historian, and although he made mistakes, he tried to be precise and scientific about the events he recorded. He traveled around the eastern Mediterranean during the time of the Greco-Persian Wars. Think 300. All the variants of maps and the world, according to Herodotus, is not made by Herodotus, but are based on Herodotus' written descriptions. Therefore, nomenclature or naming of the locations on the map may change between interpretations. On Jimmy's example, the name Atlantis appears right next to where the recart structure is located. Convenient for Jimmy, but most likely just a coincidence. The name is most likely a plural version of the name of the mountain ranges of North Africa, the Atlas Mountains. Other maps based on the descriptions of Herodotus use the forms Atlanteans. Here's a quote from an article on Herodotus and Atlantis by Thorvald C. Frank. Herodotus writes of an Atlantean sea, of a mountain called Atlas, of a river called Atlas, and of a people of Atlanteans. All these names are derived from Atlas, a titan of Greek mythology. Are there relations to Plato's Atlantis? A detailed analysis clearly shows, in contrary to popular beliefs, there are no relations. My thoughts. When trying to figure out the deal with the story of Atlantis, we must go back to the story itself. It has only one source, Plato. He claimed that it has been brought through the generations back to Solon, who heard the story while visiting Egypt. Several problems appear already. Solon made no written record of this, so it was transferred orally through several people until Plato heard it. Already at this point, we should consider doubting any precise measurement or too detailed descriptions. It tends to change when not written down. As far as I know, there are no traces of the story of Atlantis found in hieroglyphs in Egypt, which means that the story Solon heard in turn was a part of an early traditions amongst the priests of Egypt. Is it plausible that the priests of Egypt would tell stories about events predating them 9,000 years? Not really, at least not in any detail. The span of recorded history is roughly less than 5,000 years. Our collective memory reaches only so far back thanks to the invention of writing. There might however be some stories that have been told and retold so many times that in some ways they have become part of our DNA, or perhaps our collective unconsciousness if you believe in such things. The story of the flood might be a candidate for such a story. Carl Jung would call it an archetype. Richard Dawkins' concept of memes might also be relevant. Maybe we could speak of arch memes. Considering this, we might grant the concept of the flood part of the Atlantis myth to be able to survive through 9 millennia, but not much more. And we know for certain that the history of Athens, who has a central supporting role in the story of Atlantis, does not reach back any near that far. The only hope for any historicity or historical reality for the broader Atlantis myth is that we grant the possibility of misstating due to the translation error from Egyptian to Greek. If thousands rather should be hundreds as suggested, The story of Atlantis can be placed in the 15th century BCE, right in the middle of the Late Bronze Age. Athens would be a city of some importance by that time. By 1200 BCE, however, all these highly developed intertrading civilizations in the East Mediterranean had collapsed save but one, Egypt. Hundreds of cities on the Greek islands, Anatolia and the Levant were wiped out by warring sea peoples if we are to believe the Egyptians. Civilization itself was set back centuries in these areas, where there used to be Bronze Age cities of multi-storied houses with people who could read and write and trade goods over vast distances. There remained only illiterate villages of goat herders who had lost the ability to make metal, in some cases regressing to Stone Age level of technology. By then, the Minoans of Knossos and Thera, weakened by the destruction of Thera in 1600 BCE, were already replaced by the Mycenaeans, invading Crete from the mainland. This was the age of legends to later Greeks, when the gods walked the earth and bred half-gods like Heracles and Achilles. This was a legendary age of the Trojan Wars and the scene for the great stories of the Odyssey and the Iliad. As you probably know, the city of Troy was considered mythical until it was rediscovered and excavated in 1868 in modern-day Turkey. As mentioned, Egypt was the only civilization that survived the Late Bronze Age collapse about 1200 BCE. Although there is no mention of Atlantis in the written records, they write about the invasion of the sea peoples. What the Egyptian priest told Solon precisely, we cannot know, but there might be details from all the above events: the Trojan Wars, the eruption at Thera, the collapse of the Minoans, the invasion of the sea peoples. It might be a combination of several different legends. The name Atlantis itself and the geographical location has Plato most likely received from Herodotus and his descriptions of the known world. It arrives from the Atlas Mountains of North Africa on the border of the world that was known by the Greeks. Outside the Pillars of Heracles was the end of the world, the Atlantean Ocean. If we were to make up a mythical continent to prove a point in the discussion about political science and the decline of Athens, that would be the place to put it. And that is really the most important part of this tale. The story of Atlantis was never meant as a literal history. It was an allegory to prove a point. Herodotus was a diligent historian. Plato was not. He was a philosopher and a political scientist. He had ideas about how to arrange society. He argued for these ideas. He was a political force to be reckoned with. If he needed a story to make a point, he would make one up. And if he needed to give it some credibility, he could accredit it to Solon, the esteemed father of Athens. Plato scholar Julia Annas, Regents Professor of Philosophy at the University of Arizona, had this to say on the matter. The continuing industry of discovering Atlantis illustrates the danger of reading Plato, for he is clearly using what has become a standard device of fiction, stressing the historicity of an event and the discovery of hitherto unknown authorities as an indication that what follows is fiction. The idea is that we should use the story to examine our ideas of government and power. We have missed the point if instead of thinking about these issues, we go off exploring the seabed. The continuing misunderstanding of Plato, as historians here, enable us to see why his distrust of imaginative writing is sometimes justified. So, to conclude, although it's super fun to search for Atlantis, it is not likely to be found anytime soon.